Okay, guys, in this lesson, we're going to talk about percent and percent of change. You will definitely want to have a calculator handy for this lesson. And remember, pause the video at any point you need. So a percent is a ratio comparing a value to 100, a rate per 100. 5% means 5 out of 100 or 5 over 100. So 5% is the 5 over 100. So whatever your percent is, you can write it as a ratio, that number over 100. So this symbol indicates per 100. Percents represent part of a whole and can be converted to fractions and decimals and vice versa. So sometimes we're going to need to convert our rational numbers, our percents, decimals, and fractions to the other rational forms. So to convert 24%, again, the percent symbol means out of 100, then we can simplify this to 6 over 25, and then we can divide 6 divided by 25 to get the decimal form. So we have the percent, the fraction, the decimal. Now, if we're given a decimal, we can convert this first to a fraction. So this is 12 hundredths, and we can simplify by a factor of 4 with 6 over 50. We could also, to turn it to a a percent, we can just move our decimal 2 places to the right and get 12%. If we're given a fraction, we can convert this to a decimal. 2 divided by 5, remember the fraction bar means division, and so when we divide 2 by 5, we get 0.4. That's the decimal form, and then we move the decimal 2 places to the right. So 2/5, 0.4, and 40% are all equivalent. Okay, you practice converting these to the other forms. To determine the percent of a number, create a percent proportion. So we're going to bring our proportion back in. One ratio is the percent ratio, where we write it as the number over 100. So half of your proportion, your percent proportion, is the percent itself, the number over 100. The other ratio is the part to whole ratio, written as part over whole. So it's always the part compared to the whole. So when we put this all together, so we have our percent as a ratio and then our part to whole ratio, we put those together to create our percent proportion. There are 3 different situations that typically read as follows. This is some percent of that. Typically, the number before the word is represents the part, typically, and the number after the word of represents the whole number. So this will help us set up our proportion. Percent over 100 is equal to is over of. Is the part, where of is the whole. So sometimes when we have word problems and we have the words is and of, that will help us set up our percent proportion. So let's take a look at some examples. What is 15% of 20? So we have the is and the of, and then we have our 15%. So 15 over 100 is equal to what is, we don't know what the part is, so that's our x, and then the word of is before the number 20. So now we have our percent proportion, and now we're going to use cross multiplication. So we have 100x equals 15 times 20. Isolate your variable, and x is 3. So 3 out of 20 is 15%. 24 is 30% of what? So let's take a look at our percent ratio. Then we have is, so that's on top, is over of. We're looking for the whole, and now we will cross multiply. We have 30x equals 2400. Isolate x, and x equals 80. So 24 out of 80 is 30%. Our last example here, 8 is what percent of 12? So we have the part and the whole. We don't know the percent. So we have a percent proportion, cross multiply. Isolate x, and x equals 66.6 repeating, or 66 2/3, and it is a percent. Okay, pause the video and answer these questions before we continue with the lesson. In some word problems that do not include the word is or the word of, identifying the elements of your percent proportion may not be as obvious. So let's take a look at this example. Jack ate 25% of the pizza, which was 3 slices. How many slices were there in all? So we do know our percent ratio. Now we have to determine if we know the part or the whole. So he ate 3 slices. That's just part of the pizza because he didn't eat 100%. So we know 3 is the part, and we're trying to find out how many slices in all, the total. So we're going to cross multiply, isolate x, and x, the number of slices in all, is 12. So 3 out of 12 is 25%. At the antique store, 86% were items, typo there, were items that sold under $1,000. With 250 total items, how many items sold for under 1,000? So again, we have our percent ratio. We're looking for how many items under 1,000. There were a total of 250. So that is the whole. We're looking for the part. So we're going to cross multiply. We're going to isolate x. And there were 215 items that sold for under $1,000. So 215 out of 250 is 86%. Okay, pause the video before we come back to the last part of this lesson. Some situations involve the concept of increasing or decreasing an amount by a certain percentage. This is called percent of change. A percent of change is the ratio of the amount of change to the original amount. When the original amount goes up, it is called a percent of increase. When the original amount goes down, it is called a percent of decrease. So we have the amount of increase over the original or the amount of decrease over the original. And then to actually find that percent change, we will set it equal to x over 100 and use cross multiplication. So let's take a look at a few examples. Ms. Logan's class size grew from 24 to 30 students. What is the percent of change? So the original amount was 24. It increased by 6. So we put 6 over 24 equals x over 100. Now let's cross multiply. Isolate x, divide each side by 24, and x equals 25%. So this represents a percent of increase. The value of the iPhone went from $800 to $240. What is the percent change? So we're going to find the percent of decrease. So we're going to subtract 800 minus 240 because that's how much it changed, which is $560 over the original amount. And we're going to set it equal to x over 100. Now we're going to cross multiply. We're going to isolate x by dividing each side by 800, and x equals 70%, and this is a percent of decrease. Okay, you finish out the handout and then make sure that you check the answer key and make corrections before moving on to the concept check.